if we can't contain crime, we're never getting to, recidivism. We're never getting to mental health. We're never getting to addiction. We got to, get ahead of the curve on the most urgent thing, which is, people getting robbed and murdered. And we get a handle on that, then we can really, really move forward and help people. All right, hello, and welcome to the Marc and Ben Show. Today we have two very, very special guests, Chief Mike Gennaro from the Las Vegas Police Department and Sheriff Kevin McMahill, also from the Las Vegas Metro Police Department. And the reason we have these guests is there's been a little controversy lately about donations that I've made to the police department, and it's really a collaboration. We've been working together to kind of make Las Vegas both kind of the safest city in America and the best police, the highest tech, using technology to make everybody from citizens to suspects to police more safe. And turns out that the people at TechCrunch think that's a horrible idea. So we thought it'd be a great chance to explain what policing is, because it's kind of been turned into this, cartoon in America where like there's these weird reversals of good guys and bad guys and this and that and the other. But it turns out to be, maybe the single most important public service that the nation provides. And it's a really hard, complicated, difficult problem, and it's amazing, when people do it as well as we do it here in Las Vegas. So with that, I will give a full introductions of our guests. Immediately to my left is Chief Mike Gennaro. Mike is the Chief of Staff to the Sheriff, and then he's been in the Las Vegas Metro PD for 25 years, which is amazing. He's responsible for internal affairs, for intergovernmental services, and for labor relations. So he has like a great feel for the entire force. He's basically been instrumental in everything that we've been doing here in terms of upgrading things. And before that, he was in the New York Police Department. And interestingly, he was there with Bill Bratton, who kind of famously took New York City from being the murder capital to the safest city in America. And so Mike's got great insight on, what makes policing work and, and what's problematic. Secondly, to the left of Mike, we have Sheriff Kevin McMahill. He is the 8th sheriff of Las Vegas. He's been in Las Vegas for over 30 years in LVMPD. He served as undersheriff for 6 years, providing leadership during significant events like the 2020 shooting and the civil unrest that followed. He served 3 years in the United States Army before law enforcement. And one thing that I think is important to point out is, many of our officers, many of our police came from military service. So, when you think about the backgrounds of police, often they're the people who have the kind of the biggest kind of feeling of an obligation, who want to serve, who want to protect the citizens of the country and the citizens of the city. That's the bulk of the force. And so when you're thinking about, okay, what are their motivations? Where are they coming from? Like Kevin, that's where it comes from. So let's get into it. So before we start, Kevin, if you could just give us kind of a view of like, what is the scope of the Las Vegas Police Department? Like, how many people in the department? How many citizens are you protecting? What are kind of like, how many murders do we have? Like, what's the scope of the challenge?
Yeah, so thanks for having us. Las Vegas is a really, really unique city in the sense that when you look at how the police department was built, in 1973, we took the city of Las Vegas Police Department and the Clark County Sheriff's Department and merged them together to become the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. They had the wisdom back then to put an elected sheriff over the head of the police department.
So the sheriff reports to the people, not the mayor.
Exactly right. So the city council, the mayor, the county commission, they don't get to tell me how to operationally run the police department. I'm accountable to the people, which is very unique in American policing. Typically,
well, and it's very interesting because most of the big cities in America, the mayors decided to reduce the budgets of the police department after the whole kind of George Floyd, Black Lives Matter movement. But in Las Vegas, the people didn't want that.
Exactly right. Yeah, it's a really good point because, I know all those chiefs across the country and all the largest sheriffs across the country. And it's really important to know that those police chiefs are really trying really hard. But the truth is that mayors and councils and city managers really run the police departments in most of those places. And so that's one of the biggest problems in American policing, if you ask me. But so I'm also in charge of Clark County and the city of Las Vegas. Clark County is about 2.5 million people now. The city of Las Vegas about 1.3, 1.4 million. Jurisdiction across that. I also run the Clark County Detention Center, which is the largest jail in our state, also the largest mental health facility, the largest addiction treatment center, and the largest homeless shelter in the state, which is a tragedy.
Another kind of great point that you're not, when it comes to public safety, it's not just, people robbing each other and that kind of thing. You're dealing with mental health, you're dealing with homeless, drug addiction, all these kinds of things. So it's a really broad scope of issues.
Yeah, and you and I have spoke about this along with Mike many a times. We while we're the largest provider of all of those in the detention center, we also know that incarceration doesn't fix mental health, addiction, or homelessness, right? And so we're in this sort of quandary as police that 911 is the de facto response to everything, but we're not really equipped to deal with all of those things. And so our crime rate, I will tell you, I'm really proud to say our organization is 6,200 people strong. My budget is about $1.5 billion as we sit here today. 90+% of that is salary and benefits of employees. So not a lot of money left over.
Well, that's such an important point because, one of the things that I'm getting criticized in this article is, well, Ben, you as a private citizen shouldn't give money to the police. Well, we can't invest in any, there are all these amazing new technological public safety solutions. You can't invest in them if 90% is salary and benefits.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no, even if it's a huge savings over time, you can't make the initial investment.
Yeah, 100% right. We're sitting at 96 homicides. Last year we ended at 148, which was a 20% reduction in homicide from the year prior.
Which is amazing because the FBI statistics just came out and crime was way up.
Yeah, we're trying to get below 100. I don't know if I'm gonna make that goal this year, but I can tell you, and we'll talk about a number of things as we progress through here. But the one thing I think that I hope your listeners and your viewers take away from this is those are not just numbers, that there's a human life behind every one of those numbers. Every single homicide number that we talk about, sexual assault we talk about, robbery we talk, whatever it is, there's a family that has been impacted, a mother, a father, a sister, a brother, an aunt, uncle, you name it. Children whose lives will never be the same because some suspect decided to commit a violent crime against the people in our community. And that's why we're partnered up and working so hard together, is to reduce victimization, save people's lives.
Yeah. No, that's so important. As you know, I mean, you guys know, I I have a lot of friends who came out of prison. And one of the things they all say is, look, hurt people. And so, when you stop a murder, when you stop a crime, most of these victims, these are people who are likely to enter a path of crime, these families. And so it creates a whole horrible cycle where people end up, they're a victim and then they're a perpetrator.
I mean, that's a big part of the program that Mike and I work with on Hope for Prisoners, also on the reentry programs that we have for prisoners coming back into our community, is giving them an opportunity.
And that, that's one of the reasons why our organization is so successful, because you partner with an agency like Hope for Prisoners, right? Yeah. So you have cops building relationships with people getting out of prison.
Right.
And, a lot of people don't expect that, right? But now you're changing people's mindsets and you're helping course correct their future by having that relationship. Yeah. And it's important.
And Hope for Prisoners is an anti-recidivism organization that is kind of closely partnered with LVMPD. Their recidivism rate is much, much lower. Like I think the national rate's in the 70s and they're sub 10% or something.
Less than 10%.
Less than 10%.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's the first time any of those people as human beings had anybody invest into them at all.
Right.
That's part of why it's so successful.
Yeah. Isn't that, I mean, it's sad and it's amazing. You know, that,
And look, we, partner with, the folks as they're getting out of prison.
Yeah.
That's when they're being introduced to the police, right? So they have this mindset of the police are bad, the police put me here. But then fast forward 30, 60, 90, 6 months, they're actually friends and, mentors in some ways. The cops are, helping to mentor them and they have a great relationship. And then that's a force multiplier for us, right? So it's just another component to lowering crime.
Yeah, and I think it's such a misunderstanding of the general public of, what happens with kind of police and kind of people who commit crimes and have been to prison. Well, as you know, I mean, like, and my friends have been like, well, I'm not talking about guys who are in prison for 6 months, like 5, 10, 20 years. And, they love talking to you. You're one of their favorite people. They want to talk to you about everything because you're the person who understands, that life, how they got there, what they're trying to do now.
And I see how successful and driven they are to change all the, and to help people, right? Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. I love having conversations with them and hearing their stories.
Yeah. No, it's such an important kind of set of work. So one of the things, so when you look at victims, like how do they break down economically? Like, are they rich? Are they middle class? Are they poor? Like, who are the victims of these kind of homicides and robberies and these kinds of things?
That's a difficult question to answer, to give you specific numbers because it changes literally weekly, monthly, yearly. But what I will tell you is, and one of the things that we very first talked about, if you remember this, was that in Las Vegas, we have 10 areas of our town that we identify as chronic persistent hotspots. Mm-hmm. Areas where crime has been occurring since I'm going into my 35th year of policing. Yeah. They've been the same chronic criminal persistent hotspots for all of those years. And so what we talked about initially was, if you were to go in and have the ability to change the crime picture in those neighborhoods, and most of the time they are minority communities and they are lower economic income type communities. And the misnomer and the mistake that we made for so long was that we didn't realize that there are far more good people in those communities that want police to come to their community, to protect them, to give them the opportunity to thrive in those communities than there are bad folks. And so we had to change our mindset many years ago about looking at the entirety of the community as the problem and realizing there are individuals within a community that are causing a problem and laser focus and target in on those folks. But I will tell you, in Las Vegas specifically, roughly 75 to 80% of all of our crime occurs in those 10 areas. Yeah. And if when the initial conversation that we had was, if we could envelop those communities in a technology bubble and make it virtually impossible to commit crime, think about all the lives that we would be saving and reducing of the victimization. And that's where you've been absolutely critical in helping us change the narrative.
Yeah, it's so amazing. My wife grew up in an area like that. And the thing that I learned is your career path, if there are no police, is crime. There is no other. There is no go to school. You can't even get to school.
Well, the only law and order there is the gangs if there's no police, right?
Right.
So you're complying with the lawlessness in some ways.
Yes.
Survival oftentimes, really.
Yeah, no, so amazing. And, it's funny. I was looking at this reporter's background. She went to a very fancy school. She studied abroad. Did you guys study abroad?
Right.
No. You have this is the so ironic thing about kind of people criticizing the police. It's these rich people who have, their own security, or they live in a neighborhood with no crime or what have you, kind of imposing on, poor people trying to make it like a life that's impossible. And it's just, it's very, very frustrating, but it's exciting what we're doing. So I want to get into kind of how I kind of got started with it. So, I met Mike, and I was learning about Vegas PD. And Vegas is an interesting crime kind of situation because people visit Vegas to commit crimes. Like, you don't just deal with the people of Las Vegas, you deal with the crime tourists. And one of the interesting stories you told me was when during COVID, the hotels lowered their rates.
Correct.
And then
dramatically.
Yeah, dramatically. So tell us that story, because that's a crazy story.
They dropped their rates to $100, right? A night where someone would be $800, $900, $1,000.
Yeah.
And then it just created this lawlessness inside these properties.
Yeah.
And there was fighting, and they literally
So
had
people would come to Vegas and just basically commit crimes.
and then they would just go
because
out.
they're so cheap.
Because it was right. It was cheap, and they were getting suites, and they're staying in this beautiful property, and then next thing you know, there's like metal detectors going up, and it just really, well, during COVID, there wasn't a lot of crime on the Strip, right? Because it was closed. So there was a shift to different types of crimes, right? Now you had more child abuse cases, we had more residential burglaries, things along that line. So there was a shift, but the crowds that were coming were very challenging for our cops to have to deal with, as well as security personnel up and down the Strip.
Yeah, that so amazing that you've got kind of the crime in Vegas, you've got people coming to Vegas to commit crimes because whatever happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Not true for our listeners. Like, that doesn't mean you can come to Vegas, commit a crime, and not go to jail. You go to jail. But you have the highest murder solve rate in the country. And so how are you able to, why is Vegas so much better policed in terms of actually being able to solve crimes than other places, given, you've got such a variety of
I think one thing that people kind of overlook with Vegas is, I look at Vegas as a city within a community, right?
Right.
And people kind of dismiss how strong our community is here and how hard this police department has worked to develop a relationship with that community. You look at the old stick and whistle cop, right?
Yeah.
That this cop walking down the street, and that cop, his feet are hitting that pavement every day, and he knew that neighborhood, and he knew the cars, he knew the people. It was an intimate relationship between the cop and the community.
Right.
And our organization, going back many, many years, and the sheriff, he has helped develop a lot of programs that we still have today that are even stronger. When a crime happens, someone in the community knows who did it, right?
Yeah, right.
And if the community doesn't want to talk to the cops, well, you're going to have a low solve rate there, right? Yeah. And you're going to have more crime.
Right.
And the fact that, we have such a great relationship with the community, that really helps drive that solve rate up, because people are willing to come forward, they're willing to talk to us, they're willing to be a lot more compliant, whereas in other cities, right off the bat, they don't have that advantage. And I'm sure you have some other reasons as well, but I think that's a really huge driving factor for why we're so successful.
Actually, that brings me to, Kevin, you told me a story, which was one of the reasons I really wanted to kind of get involved with the Las Vegas Metro PD, was, after the riots, the kind of riots that started all over America and people were protesting. And the approach here was community policing. You went into the community and you gave a talk, and you could you relay what you did, how that talk went, how the community reacted?
Yeah, and I think that Mike's right on that. We've for well over 20 years been working on trying to find a way to build trust in communities where none existed, and lots of different programs. One of which is we call the Safe Village program, that had just dramatic results in West Las Vegas and our so-called black part of town.
Yeah.
Those investments really paid off, but that's the hard part of police work, because putting handcuffs on somebody and taking them to jail, that's simple. Yeah. We're all exceptional at that as well, which is part of why homicide solve rates are good, is because we have an entirety of a department approach to it. Mm-hmm. But the part that's hard is how do you go into communities and develop a relationship where none exists? And then how do you continue to foster that relationship so that you can actually get to a place where trust is built? And we've worked on that for so long. And then when George Floyd happened, you know, the first thing that I did was stood up and you don't need an investigation to tell you anything different. You don't you don't kneel on an African-American man's neck or any man's neck, by the way, for 9 minutes. You just don't do it. Right. And you don't treat a human being in the manner that officer treated George Floyd. You just don't do it. And so it's not hard for me as the sheriff, the chief of the law enforcement organization here, to stand up and call out bad behavior when you see it. And so, I think the community believed that from us, but also I asked a whole lot of people in the community to make sure that as we continue, and we had lots of things happen in our community the same way, but we didn't get our community burned down like Minneapolis or downtown taken over like Seattle or Portland or any of these other places, because it wasn't just me, but it was people throughout this community that said, that's not our police department. Yeah. They stood up and they believed in us. They stood with us, and they went out and they made sure that everybody in this community understood that Las Vegas is not any one of those other cities, and we don't tolerate that type of behavior by our police. Right.
You know, and it's just remarkable, you know, how different it was here. And it's such a blueprint, I think. And that's, you know, like one of the things we're trying to do together is build the ultimate kind of policing blueprint for the country, not just for Las Vegas. And that's kind of where kind of technology started to come in. So kind of when I heard all those stories, you know, I went to, who's the CTO at LVMPD?
Oh, it was James Kilbert.
Yeah, James Kilbert. And I said, look, like, let's make you the technologically most advanced police department in the country. But, you know, like, part of it is technology, but, you know, one of the first things we ran into was culture.
Right.
And you came to me, we had an issue with 911 operator attrition. And, you know, like, maybe you could tell us about that.
Yeah, we had at our 911 center, we had a 50% vacancy rate.
Yeah.
So 911, you know, employees were showing up to work and we couldn't even have them leave because we didn't have anybody to cover the next shift. And it was just breeding this, you know, this culture of they didn't want to come to work. We couldn't hire anybody. And it was, you know, it was very dim. And, you know, fortunately, so when...
And you had personnel budget, right?
Correct.
So,
yeah.
But the work environment, it's a stressful, I mean, you're getting calls, you know, people are dying and these kinds of things. Very, very stressful job. So, like, what were, you know, what was the kind of cultural implication that, like, kind of, that caused so much attrition? And,
you know, it was... I think a lack of recognition by leadership. They had broken equipment in there.
Yeah.
And really nobody walked around and said, hey, what do you need?
Right.
So that was one of the first things we did when the sheriff took over is, you know, we went in there and said, hey, what do you guys need? And look, it was, the chairs were fucked up and the keyboards were fucked up. Right.
Yeah.
So there were things visibly that we knew we could change. And in talking to them, you know, they were like, we don't even have an ice machine. I was like, you don't have an ice machine?
Yes,
like,
ice. Ice. When I tell people that, they're like, ice? Like, did they have, like, you know, were they sore? And I was like, no, like, just ice to, you know, like, for your Coke.
Yeah. And like, you know, so they had their own coolers with ice and they would like scoop, right? Yeah. So that was just another component of
not first
the
class.
Atmosphere, right? Yeah. The atmosphere, and that just bred this negative type of culture. And then they were like, yeah, you know, the coffee machine's always broken, and it's funny because you and I talked when we were talking about the coffee. You were like, let's get a new machine, change the coffie, change the culture, right? Like I was like, I need that on a T-shirt.
Simple idea.
Like,
yeah, let's get a full espresso cappuccino. Like, forget Mr. Coffee, we're going full out.
But it was. And it was, you know, changing the leadership down there was instrumental. Yeah. And hearing out some of the concerns that they had. And look, there was some low-hanging fruit that we were able to change to make their life a little bit better, remove some policies that were archaic. And, just create a different atmosphere, and making sure that leadership was in alignment with, they were supporting the new direction that we were going and coming through with what we said. If we said you were going to get this, well, then we had to deliver on that, right? Because there was a lot of trust in our new pathway forward.
Right.
But if we didn't deliver, well, then we were going to be like, okay, you don't care, and you're just coming down here giving us lip service. But really coming through on everything that we delivered, hearing them out, sent out a lot of surveys, listened to what they had to say, and now look, we're 100% staffed, and that was like within a year.
Yeah.
We got the staffing up. 911 calls are answered in less than 10 seconds.
And what was it? At the bottom.
There was was it 4 minutes? What was it?
Yeah, worse than that. We had sometimes 911 calls were 6-7 minutes. 311 non-emergent calls would be 4 or 5 hours at times.
Yeah, so amazing. I mean, it speaks so much to, we got to care about the people who are trying to save lives, or everybody's life's in jeopardy. I mean, this is the thing that's so, I think, core to what we're trying to do in Vegas is, just coffee, ice, 6 minutes to 10 seconds. Imagine you're on the other end of that 911 call, and you're bleeding out, or whatever is happening.
Right, your kid drowned, right?
Yeah.
Or you need some sort of...
You're on hold 6
right.
minutes. Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah, so it was that. So we got them fully staffed. And as you recall, there was, a lot of vacant area inside that communication center. And the plan was to eventually add more 911 terminals for call takers. And then we eventually got the staffing up to where, okay, this is a reality now, but we couldn't get the funding to get these computer terminals. And, we were looking out to a lot of political figures to, hey, help us fund this. Yeah. And that wasn't a reality. And that's something that, you and Felicia did. You came in and you bought all those 911 call terminals for us.
I think people don't understand, you have an operation up and going, and the way public budgets work, you can handle today, but investing in anything in the future, even something as simple as coffee, is just much more difficult. That process is going to be a long time. So if, a citizen like myself can step in, we can just, once we make the investment, then we'll see the return. And then everything gets better. But it's that initial investment that's so hard through the normal process.
Yeah, he can attest more to that. But yeah, it's almost, it is impossible sometimes. You can allocate money, but then you're taking from somewhere else. Right. So you're not really making a difference. Right.
And it's, very, very small investment, so many lives saved over a coffee machine.
It's funny, we talk about the coffee machine. You got the coffee machine, but we couldn't find the $2,000 to get the water to the ice machine, right? That took us 2 months to find, and we didn't want to ask, right? But we had to try and find $2,000 to get the water to the ice machine, right? But
now we're building a gym. We're going to
look, it's
911 should be a highly respected, great job.
Look, obviously. The men and women that work down there are the first responders, right? Yeah. When someone calls for help, they're the first ones there. And they do a remarkable job. And it's great to be able to give them that recognition and to let them know that, hey, there are people out in the community that you don't even know that really appreciate what you're doing. And that's why you got these great things.
You can't really oversell, though, we joke about coffee machines and ice machines and all of these things additional, but you helped us change the culture there. And changing the culture there allowed for us to have happy employees again. Yeah. People that they love to come to work, but they're working in a challenging environment and the building had gone to hell. Yeah. And you just helped us get us back to a place and deliver on the word that we said we were going to do in a far more rapid fashion than we ever would have been. In fact, if we would have relied on normal budgetary process, we wouldn't be where we're at today. Yeah. Today, now I can deliver a service to the citizens of Las Vegas that I would have never been able to deliver to them because we changed the environment. People want to work there again. And when you go down there now, they're happy.
Yeah.
That says a lot.
So important, when you think about technology, it really starts with the people, right? So if the people aren't in the right place, you could add whatever technology you want, it's still not going to do anything. It's so key. But let's get into the technology. So the first program we started was a drone program. And, like, I think to the normal person, they might not know, why did drones matter in policing? How does that affect safety? How does that kind of change operations?
Drones help us become more efficient and effective, and we can respond faster, save lives, and de-escalate situations much quicker. You have a drone that can be overhead in 30 seconds to a minute. And what is critical in policing is real-time, accurate information intelligence, right? That real-time intelligence. If someone calls 911 and says that there's a guy walking through the cul-de-sac and he's armed with a rifle, right? And we could send a drone up in that cul-de-sac, and we see that the guy is actually dragging a broomstick, okay?
Right.
Right now, there, we could have just saved a citizen's life, okay? Because we have a drone overhead now. We're still going to handle it very tactically, but now we know, okay, it's not a rifle. We could zoom in. It's a broomstick, okay? Yeah. Completely different situation where before, guys are going to roll down their cul-de-sac, guns drawn, and it could easily result in an officer-involved shooting.
Right.
So the de-escalation part of that and the safety for everybody in that community just off that one type of call is profound.
Yeah.
It's profound.
Yeah. And you have, look, people get scared. They report things that aren't true.
And unknowingly, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we joke about even, people are out in the, our own folks are out at a crime scene. Yeah. Typically the first 2 phone calls we get, the information's not accurate. We're getting it from our own people. It's not that they're lying, but things evolve, situations evolve, facts change, right? Yeah. And then, okay, now you got the whole story. Right. So when someone from calling 911, they're scared, it's their perception, it's whatever it is, it's not right.
And from an officer perspective, what is it like to, if you don't have the intelligence and you walk into a situation, your information is that the person's armed, you have a gun in your pocket. What does that feel like? What are you thinking about, in terms of, your life, your family, solving? Because, there's all these things. Oh, he should have de-escalated it. He should have shot him in the leg and so forth. But what is it, what does that feel like from the kind of other perspective?
Yeah, if you look at it from an officer standpoint, going down that cul-de-sac with that same scenario, right? He's going down with the information that he was given, what he knows at that time. And you're going down there and you try and pre-plan and you try and, yet you're going to de-escalate as much as possible. And that guy turns to you with that broomstick and now it results in an officer-involved shooting. And now you have a dead citizen that did not have a firearm. Yeah. And that cop is going to have to live with the fact that he shot someone that was not armed. Right. And even though that would be a legal shooting, because based on his perception and what he knew, but what people don't understand, and, I did the officer-involved shootings and the interviews for, well over 100 officer-involved shootings. People don't realize how it affects that cop and how it affects his family and his kids, right? So it's so profound. The last thing a cop wants to do is have to shoot someone, and then you shoot someone that's not even armed. So now that drone is overhead, and it alleviates so much of that stress on incident commanders, on cops, on a community, right?
And then if he does have a gun.
Look, now we could slow things down. It's confirmed. We have eyes on him, right? You don't got to put anybody in danger. You don't even have to send a canine dog. Right. And we could just evaluate, and we have time on our side now to really determine how to handle this. Right. And that is such a, you can't put a price tag on that.
Yeah. Amazing. And then, so then we have another program with technology from a company called Flock Safety, which is, there are a lot of cameras in Vegas, but this really enhances how you use them. Maybe you can describe, how that technology works.
Yeah. So the Flock cameras are hooked up to major intersections and they're license plate readers, as well as they could, look for a red vehicle with a smashed out red taillight, for example, right? If it was utilized in a crime. and we get a large number of flock hits that help us find murder suspects, stolen vehicles, robbery suspects, where, there's not a cop at that intersection and the vehicle goes through and it's like, okay, flock got the vehicle. And now you can have, a drone go out overhead. And this is one thing that's great because it police response, a lot of issues with policing and what the critics were saying is, okay, if, Metro was looking for a red car that was used in a robbery, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now you have cops stopping all these red cars, let's say,
right. And then you get the...
So now you have the mindset we were talking before, right?
Yeah.
So, but now I think you're armed. It was in a robbery. You're like, hey, why are you coming up to my car with your gun drawn? Bad things happen. And now all of a sudden you have, let's just hypothetically say, a shooting.
Yeah.
From really what could have been an unnecessary stop. But with the drones...
Not even the right car.
Not even the right car, but it fits a description.
Yeah.
But now when you utilize both technologies, Flock found the vehicle, and now you have a drone overhead that's like, hey, this is the car right here. You bypass all of those unnecessary police interactions, and now you have a very calculated response on a suspect vehicle, where we would never have that without those two technologies.
Yeah. It's so, people overlook that because, you get the press will interview a citizen who was pulled over for the wrong reason. And they're like, wow, I was profiled, I was this, I was that. But like in a zero information environment where all you know is a car, a light out, the race of the suspect may or may not be the correct race, this and that, the other. That's such a different situation than if you have an intelligence program with technology, then all of a sudden, like these things go away. People are, the solution isn't, the worst solution is less police. The right solution is better intelligence, which gets you better policing. So it's just so interesting and amazing how it's worked here in Vegas. Actually, Marc, why don't I let you? I've been doing all the talking.
So I think this has been a great discussion so far. So a couple of clarifying questions I think people might find really interesting. So one is when most people, I think of drones, they think of like the Predator drones flying overhead in the Middle East or something like that. Like, is that what you guys are talking about, or are you guys talking about something different?
Yeah, no, we're not talking about that at all. Although, I am keenly interested at some point in getting those more capable type of drones and expanding that into our search and rescue and our surrounding mountainous areas where I have to commit, officers and helicopters to go do that kind of stuff. I think there's absolutely use for drone as we move into that arena as well. But we're talking about, we use drone operations in a lot of different areas. Right now, we have deployed a drone as a first responder where we basically treat it like a canine unit. So the drone operator will work with a uniformed police officer. They'll go out to a hot call. They'll stop short of the actual scene, launch the drone overhead. The operator will continue to operate, and then the uniformed police officer will start to provide real-time intelligence to the rest of the responding officers as they're out there. That's been up and running now for about 3 or 4 months, and some of the results have just been absolutely fantastic. The officers in the field love what it is they're doing. We also use drones in SWAT operations, where we have glass break capability on some of those drones as well. We'll drive them up, break the window out so you don't have to put a police or a SWAT officer up into a place where they could potentially be shot. They'll do entries into a home before I have to commit a human body into the home. These drone operators have gotten so good, they'll fly up into attics now, and they have the capabilities that we just never had before. And so the whole intent there is making sure that we save the lives of our SWAT officers before they have to go in there. But also, you'd be surprised at how often we're able to communicate to a suspect through a drone, or we make entry, we take a door, make entry with the drone, and the suspect just gives up because the drone is in the house. We have a drone dog that we use for explosive and chemical detective, chemical and explosive residue detection. We have drone operations in a lot of different aspects of our organization that has just been utilized to really minimize the risk to not only our officers, but the suspects involved in that.
They're used all the time now for public safety at large scale events, right? F1, these drones are up, buzzing around all day, all night, covering such a vast area, checking rooftops, looking for, potential snipers or people that don't belong in certain areas. So large scale events, we're using these drones now at every single one of them.
Yeah. And you guys highlighted this, but I think it's really important for people listening to really understand this, and tell me if I have this right, which is if you guys have to field a human being with a badge and a gun to get eyes on a situation, you have an inherent risk every time, an officer has to enter a convenience store in the middle of the night, right? Or has to enter a home where there's a potential home invasion, or even just gets a call on a domestic disturbance. If you're sending an officer with eyes and a firearm, you have inherent danger in every such interaction that something is going to go horribly wrong. And if the purpose of that interaction is just to understand what's happening, and you can send in a drone instead, you not only are potentially saving your officer's life, you're potentially saving the lives of innocent people in that context. And in fact, ironically, also quite possibly the criminals themselves. Is that right?
100%. Yeah, that's exactly, there are still going to be certain times where we have say a hostage rescue where we have to go in immediately with the officers, regardless of what happens, trying to save that hostage's life. We have a number of those every year. But even in those cases, there's oftentimes an opportunity to deploy a drone before we get there to try to give that immediate intelligence to those SWAT officers as they have to enter. And so we try to use that technology to limit the exposure of both the officers and the suspects alike. And it's been wildly successful at our organization.
The latest thing that we're getting ready to deploy is kind of new 911 technology. And Mike, maybe you can talk about, okay, what is that technology? And then when we add it to, flock safety, to the drone program, and to your shot spotter technology, and you put that all together, what are we looking forward to in the future?
Yeah. So the new dispatch technology, or the 911, prepared 911. So essentially right now, when someone calls 911, it goes to a 911 call taker. Mm-hmm. They're receiving that call, getting that information from the PR or the person that's calling. Right. And then that information then gets put out to a dispatcher, and then that dispatcher puts it out to the police officer. With this new technology, as soon as someone calls 911, the officer in the field is going to be able to hear that 911 call come in as it's actually coming in.
Oh, wow.
So again, act fast, right? Because the faster the officer can respond, the faster we could start saving lives. So if you think of this as let's say an active shooter or a robbery in progress, right? Mm-hmm. Because what happens is if the cop's driving down the street and there's a shooting at a gas station and it's a white car, that cop could drive right past that white car and not know that was the suspect.
Right.
But with this technology, as the call is coming in, the cop's hearing, oh, there was just a shooting at ABC gas station, and the suspects are leaving in a white 4-door car. He's actually hearing it real time as it's coming in before the dispatcher even puts it out. So now that cop can immediately get eyes on that suspect vehicle, or go immediately render aid, whatever has to happen, but it's immediate.
Right.
But if you also think about it from this perspective, so with these X10s that we're going to be deploying, so imagine the scenario Mike just painted. A gunshot goes off, shot spotter detects it, or an LPR from flock goes off, and we have a pre-positioned drone that launches because of the other technology tells them, hey, go here. Right. Now back at our real-time crime center, we're going to have a police officer capable of piloting that drone, giving real-time intelligence within 30 seconds to a minute of an incident that's occurring. Every police officer that's responding here through prepared 911 will be able to listen to the real-time 911 call as they're responding to this, hearing what the PR is telling our dispatch. So that lag time of a minute, 3 minutes is removed on the most critical calls that we have when our officers are responding. That is an absolute game changer in our world.
Yeah, amazing.
Absolute.
And one thing the listeners may not understand is when that drone is up, every police officer who's responding has that feed on their phone. So they all have this intelligence.
So everyone's getting this real-time intelligence. So it's multi-layered, right? As you're describing the technology, just like policing, right? There's so many different moving parts to it. So when you have all this technology coming together in one city, I mean, we'd love to have zero crime, right? So now you have all of this technology, yet with the core foundation of community policing, which we've always had. So when you put it all together, I mean, we're hoping to have literally the most dynamic city, yet the safest city.
Yeah, which is amazing. I mean, if Vegas becomes the safest city, that'll be the most incredible thing. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, but it's not crime.
You know, and Ben, the truth is I have a lot of employees, the vast majority of them, that really believe we can get there.
Yeah,
I think the belief in what you have brought to our police department, the both of you have brought to our police department, there's this buzz and excitement. I guess because I'm not really a technologist by any stretch of the imagination, but I can tell you the excitement that I hear from these folks about these technologies is really palpable out there within the workforce.
Yeah, amazing. And we kind of had a better place to deploy it because, you know, it starts with the community policing, the trust, and then, you know, you add the technology to that, and we could do something really special. So, Marc, you had some other questions.
Yeah. So, you know, you guys alluded to, you know, many other cities in the country are dealing with a lot of these same challenges. And, you know, I can't help but note, you know, obviously there's been a just vigorous disputes over the last 5 years on, you know, sort of the nature of policing in a lot of cities. And, you know, you have cities maybe like Chicago that may be going in the other direction, which is they've deliberately like turned off ShotSpotter as an example. So maybe you guys could like help us understand like the stuff that you guys are doing in Vegas and the implementation of these technologies and the change to the methods and all the benefits that we've been talking about. Like, if you look at the list of the other, you know, 50 big cities in the U.S., like, would your expectation be that as you prove it, all those other cities can do all the same things you're doing? Or do you think that, you know, for whatever set of reasons, it's just not practical or possible?
That's a great question. And so as a sheriff, but also as a chief of a major city, I happen to be fortunate enough to be member of both Major City Chiefs Association, which is the 58 largest cities in the U.S. and Canada, as well as Major County Sheriffs Association, which is the equivalent for all of the largest sheriff's departments. I can tell you that, you know, we meet 3 or 4 times a year. We share notes. We all try to duplicate the things that work in a variety of different communities. Some are more successful than the others, but what I will tell you is that I think the answer to your question is, unfortunately, not, because we don't have all across this great United States of ours people like the two of you that are willing to go in and help out from a budgetary perspective, but also, you know, we've had the opportunity to learn so much from both of you in talking about how you approach business. I have 6,200 employees. I run a very large organization, and getting the opportunity to bounce things off of Ben here has been invaluable to me, number one. But I think the challenge is that every single one of these organizations would love to be able to say they have the technologies that we do. But in a reality, the budgetary processes that most large cities have, as we know, you know, for a long time they were cutting. They lost the faith of their police, which is a horrible thing because if, you know, cops can choose to come to work and do nothing. And if you do nothing, nothing happens, right?
They call that the blue flu.
Yeah, exactly. And so we don't suffer from that here, but I believe that as this technology catches on, much like we've seen with Flock, the LPR, I know the city of Las Vegas is moving to buy some for their marshal services right now. There's no doubt about it. There'll be a slower implementation of these types of programs across the United States. They're just not going to be able to get to them as rapidly as we are, but we're going to prove it's going to work. And I think more and more municipalities will find the people that are like you, both that really want to help make their community safe because literally lives depend on it.
Yep. Good. And then second question, if you guys have an answer to this, is like what's on your wish list? And of course, you know, it's not your job to, you know, hopefully our companies will be able to come up with the ideas for technology, but like what's on your wish list for kind of pressing issues where you're like, wow, I wish we could do X and we haven't figured out how to do it yet.
So I'll give you one. You know, I really believe that some of this AI here in the near future can have a tremendous impact on what has caused significant challenge for me as the sheriff. And one of those is in the body redaction, or body camera redaction technology. So as it stands now, I had to create an entire unit of 12 people to deal with our public records requests that come in. And I'm bound to buy, every state has different laws on what you can release and what you, so if I have to scrub out an individual's face, I have to have a detective watch that entire body worn camera video to make sure we redact that throughout the entire process. That technology can't be all that difficult to develop to get us to a place where I don't have to have real cops doing tedious work to remove, faces, addresses, names, things that were said inside of that. And then the other one, quite frankly, is there's a technology that we utilize to solve a lot of crimes, and that's cell tower dumps. So we'll take an individual's cell tower, their cell phone is it hits when, let's say we have a crime series that's occurring. We may have a cell tower that hits in Henderson, another one in North Las Vegas, another one, 3 or 4 here in Las Vegas. Criminals don't know geographic boundaries, but you can imagine the amount of cell phone data that we get when we get that through subpoena, and then we have to manually go through all of this to try to find the same telephone number. But if we could get to the place where that technology is able to take that sometimes literally millions of cell phone numbers that were there, to sort of go through it and give us a report that says, hey, these 7 telephone numbers at the date and time that you're looking for were in all of these specific locations. It helps us develop leads. Now, it doesn't develop probable cause. Let me be clear on that. But what it does do is it points us into a place where those individuals were in those locations when these major crimes occurred. And so we can rule them in or continue our investigative efforts to help resolve those series in a much more rapid fashion. And we do that already. We solve most of our robbery series very rapidly because of some of that type of effort, as well as just, look, I'd be remiss to say we have exceptional people that work here at Metro. Our detectives are fantastic. The relentless effort in follow-up and follow-through is exceptional. The leadership is exceptional. And all those support things are great, but technology can be utilized to more rapidly get through some of the challenges of data that we have in the very near future. And I think that's going to be a game changer as well.
Oh, yeah. The second one sounds like a very easy solve for us. The first one will be easy soon. There's probably, we got to go back and look at that.
I think that would now be a straightforward application now to just say, these faces need to be scrubbed out of this entire video sequence and just have it happen automatically. It should be very easy, those kinds of things, or even identify the unique faces in the thing and just let you point and click which ones you want in or out. That should be easy. So a couple broader picture things, questions. So I see these graphs. You can tell me this is right, but homicide solve rates have been dropping nationwide for a very long time. Like the percentage of homicides where there's ultimately a solution and hopefully a convicted criminal has been dropping. It's like fallen in half over the last 30 years or something like that. Is that like what's happening? This is not a Vegas specific question.
Not true in Vegas. Vegas, it's 94%.
Okay. Right. Okay. Well, there's a question. Why is it so high in Vegas and why is it falling in so many other places?
I think Mike alluded to some of it earlier. There's a lot of things I would tell you that go into that secret sauce of solving these. And I think it's important for you to understand is that means that you don't get away with homicide here. And that has a sort of downstream effect on criminals to understand that if you're going to come to Las Vegas and commit these types of crimes, you're going to get caught. That's a big part of it. Whereas you look at other cities where, they have maybe a 30% solve rate, the individuals that are out there on the street, they're not afraid of getting caught because the cops are never getting them. That is attributed to what Mike talked about on our literally couple decade long investment in developing trust in places that it doesn't exist. But you can't take away the fact that we also had really sort of changed the mindset that our approach to homicides is not just that a homicide detective owns that case now. When we have a homicide in our jurisdiction, or in the case of our new shooting team, you will see that we have a whole of agency approach. That means that that patrol cop that's out there on the street that works that neighborhood knows that community better than any detective ever will. The only people that know the community better than the cop that works in that community are the people that live in that community. So that relationship between those beat cops and the community. So let me just give you a simple example of a homicide that we solved a number of years ago based on this effort. Was when I was working in 2010 as the captain of West Las Vegas, predominantly black part of town, we had about 13 homicides. The solve rate was exactly a guess, 0. Not a single homicide had been solved. And there were a number of detectives that said, well, and I just have to admit this was what was said was, it's a self-cleaning oven. Today's suspect, tomorrow's victim. And that didn't sit well with me. And so we actually introduced a patrol officer who had been working over there for years to go down and look at those homicide cases that were unsolved in our community. And he knew the vehicle that was used because it was a distinctive white van with a teardrop window in the back. He knew who drove that and where that van was that night. They were able to go and solve that first case. So we have an entirety of organization approach that we all own that homicide. And that's part of why, but I also tell you, those detectives are relentless. They're led well. They give a damn. And they really, truly believe it's their job to bring the worst of the worst to justice. And they'd never let those cases go.
And Marc, I mean, you have to put in perspective here what the sheriff just said. Some of these agencies have a 30% closure rate, right? Or success rate. That means criminals committing homicides have a 70% chance of getting away with it. Like, just to put that in perspective, that's an incredible number.
Right. So to your point, you can't if you let a community get into that state, many more bad things are going to happen.
Of course.
You can't let it get to that point. So this is a related question. So Mike, I'm really curious your NYPD experience. So one of the arguments that a lot of the kind of reform people made in the 2010s that led to, a lot of changes in a lot of places in the US, one of the arguments was actually the New York example is not a good example. So the argument basically, so the famous story, right, is New York City had this just like massive explosion of crime, ramp up in crime in the 70s through the 90s, and then Mayor Giuliani and I guess Commissioner Bratton or Chief Bratton and then later Bloomberg, and then all of you guys, implemented a set of changes to how policing operated in New York City, and then that led to this like incredible reduction in crime to the point where, I mean, I walked through Central Park in 2015 in the dead of night, completely by myself. And it was just wonderful. It was, it felt completely safe. It got to the point where New York City was, at least felt like it was just incredibly safe. And then, there's been this explosion of crime and violence ever since. So, but the argument went is was that due to changes in policing, or was that just kind of like the tides, which is okay, you had, the crack epidemic, and it sort of came and went. And so crime, of course, is going to ramp up and back down anyway. And then also the economy was doing bad in the 70s and then, was doing much better in the 90s and 2000s. And so, of course, crime's going to be worse with a bad economy and it's going to go away with a good economy and so forth. And so, basically the critique or the argument was all these policing changes didn't actually drive that massive decline in crime. And so, therefore, if you stop doing those things, you could actually keep to a low rate of crime. What's your when you see somebody make that argument, what's your response to that?
I can tell you before Bratton was the police commissioner, if a homicide happened in a certain part of town, that captain really didn't have to answer many questions about that homicide, right? But what he started doing, one of the things he started doing was holding area command captains accountable for crime. Why did that homicide occur? Was it a problem house? Should you have known about it? Were there problem people there? And they really started drilling down, holding these captains accountable, which really was a completely different business model for that profession, right? It was almost like a corporate structure now where it was like, hey, you're going to come in and you're going to have to answer for these numbers, which was kind of unheard of before. And then out on the street, there was the expectation that, and it started when he was over the transit authority. When I was a kid and I'd going on the train, countless people would just hop those terminals, right? They weren't paying for it. And then all of a sudden there was the expectation that you're going to start arresting people for hopping those turnstiles. And lo and behold, the guys that were hopping the turnstiles were guys that had firearms. Those guys were potentially going to do murders. Those guys were the ones doing the robberies. So, this stop and frisk, they expected us to go out and stop people, put your hands on people. If you saw people loitering on a corner, whether it was blasting music or smoking dope, whatever it was, they wanted it addressed. And, Bill Bratton even came into, the academy when I was there, and he referenced the broken windows theory. And he said, look, these environments breed more, right? You have to have an environment that is going to breed success for this community. You can't have people hanging out on a street corner. You can't have people hopping turnstiles. We can't have graffiti on the walls. It's got to be uncomfortable for criminals, but comfortable for the community. And then the community will thrive. And we had such a huge impact. And, you were responsible for how many people you stopped, cars you stopped, but it had a profound impact on, I would say, the overall crime, but also getting to know the people in the neighborhoods, because we were walking these neighborhoods, we were, through the projects, and you knew, your allies and foes. And it was a completely different mindset than when I hear about it now. I'm shocked, because I'm like, wow, it was so different when I was there, and nobody in a million years would think about hopping a turnstile or causing issues, on a subway platform. And it didn't happen before. They'd be arrested. And it just kind of goes back to that broken windows theory.
And then basically what's happened, I think, tell me this is right, it's like those changes are reversed. Is that all those?
Yeah,
those changes
the stop and frisk policy, and all these policies and expectations that were put forward were eventually stopped.
Yeah, which has led to, in retrospect, predictable consequences.
Yeah, I mean, police matter, right?
Yeah, actually, Marc, one thing that's interesting kind of about what you brought up and about Mike's background is, Mike was deep cover for 10 years, with the Italian mafia, with MS-13, with like real, the most sophisticated criminals. And I think people's perceptions of, these people who comment on it, whatever, economists sitting in their nice offices, have not interacted with criminals. And so their assumption is, a criminal's motivation is they can't afford a loaf of bread, and so they're going to go rob a store. That's generally not true. And Mike, maybe you talk about there's a variety of criminals, but it also is, it's a career.
Yeah. I mean, you have career criminals, right? And we have a unit, the career criminals section, they follow career criminals. Some of these guys, 80% of their adult life, they've spent incarcerated, and that's what they know. And to circle back kind of to the Hope for Prisoners, you kind of hope they would head into this Hope for Prisoners program, because it's just what they know, and it's what they do. And it's unfortunate, but it's, how do you break that cycle, right? How do you break that mindset? And that's where it's such a multi-layered approach to try and get through, to change some of these folks.
Sometimes it's also, if you look at it, it's really generational. I mean, we see this all the time. It's where oftentimes where you were born, what opportunities were provided to you, and a lot of people that as Ben suggests, that sit in their offices and think they know what they're talking about, is they're just lucky to be born to who they were born to, where they were born,
exactly,
and never had to really work to get out of that gang life. A lot of that is simply survival, and every major American city has those kinds of communities, including Las Vegas. And so our hope is that all of our effort is driven towards sort of breaking a lot of that cycle. And, you mentioned something at the beginning of your question to Mike in regards to the crack epidemic. There's still a crack epidemic, by the way. And if you look over the years, the epidemic just has a different drug name now. I mean, we went from having almost 1,000 methamphetamine labs that were here in Southern Nevada. At one time, we had an entire meth team that had to go in and eradicate these things. And now I don't think we had one meth lab, I believe, last year. We don't It's all shifted south of the border. You had the oxy, the heroin. Today, it's a fentanyl crisis. Fentanyl is in every street drug that is bought and sold, and people are dying at extremely high rates of it. And so we can always say that, this particular drug or that drug is partially what leads to significant violence. And we know that low-level drug deals out on the street absolutely lead to violence. In fact, I just make this point to you is there are all those folks that are behind the legalization of marijuana, which it's legal in most places now. There's no argument there. There's not even much for me to talk about that. But what I will tell you is the legalization of marijuana has done nothing to eradicate the black market of marijuana. In fact, I tell people all the time that I've been to 100 bar fights over alcohol and never one bar fight over marijuana. But I've been to a lot of homicide scenes over the low-level sales of marijuana. It's just a fact, right? And so we have to look at behaviors of individuals associated with that and how that contributes to the crime. But a lot of that programming that we have is really developed around what we started off on talking about with addiction and mental health and homelessness, because they all seem to be intertwined. And, we're really working on trying to figure out how to connect services for all of those, not only while they're in our custody, but also as they move out of custody, because we find that while we have great services in our jails for these individuals, the minute we release them out on the street, they don't have a place to go get those the patch that keeps them off of heroin for a particular period of time, or they don't have health insurance to continue to do that. So I bring that point up because I think it's really important for people to understand, we've become involved in all kinds of things that are really not the police's responsibility, because our heart lies in making sure that people are not losing their lives, or the only thing they'll ever know is a life of crime. And, we keep talking about all of the stuff we do here. One of the big things you have to do is connect people with a meaningful wage-paying job, because if they get out of prison, they can't get an ID, they can't get a real job to take care of their families, you're going to perpetuate that cycle and they're going to go right back to prison. And so all of this stuff, technology continues to help us so that I can also continue to have people work on the things that are really about saving the soul as well.
Yeah, the ID and all those things, one of the, talking to people, I've come out of prison, one of the probably most ham-fisted, least technologically enabled things that we do is we just go, okay, you have a felony, and therefore, you can't rent an apartment, you can't buy a house, you can't vote, you can't do the things. And then employers all know that, and you're just in this very broad category. And it's funny because, one of my friends, Shaka Senghor, who, has a felony and came out of prison, was like super upset when like the Democrats were saying, Trump's a felon. It's like, stop stigmatizing felons. What are you doing? Because that is what makes you continue as a criminal, is that you can't re-enter life. And I think that, that's one place where we need technological solutions so you can get, look, I understand, protecting citizens, somebody's coming out of jail and so forth, but we need more data. We need, full information. Like, what kind of prisoner were they? Like, what are they trying to do? What's the real likelihood of this person with this profile coming out and doing something? I got a friend who's been out 10 years. Like, he's been out 10 years, he hasn't committed a crime. He's probably less likely to commit a crime than, a random person you'd hire. And, we just don't have any of that information. We don't have any of that. We don't have enough support for these guys to get back on track. And, that's such an important point.
Ben, and if you think about it, if you look at what they did to individuals that were leaving prison, they would prepare them for auto body, for auto mechanics, or culinary. And I don't know about you, but if they said, hey, Kevin, you're getting out of prison, you got to go learn how to be an auto mechanic, I don't have that aptitude. I don't have that skill, right? Maybe I could learn it, but it's also not something I'm passionate about. So it's developing programming, and technology can really help in this. Is what do we find that person is interested in? What are they intrinsically motivated with? Because if you find something and you connect that individual with it, and they can build a life through it, and we can actually provide a bit of hope to them, that's one of the game changers that really takes these people that never contributed a single thing in our society to now become longtime contributing members of our society and save their lives. And that's, I know it sounds corny to a lot of different people, but that's what technology is going to allow us to do as we continue to move forward.
Yeah. Such a big, important component of the program. And I think that, I mean, like one of the, how integrated you are, not just, with Hope for Prisoners and the DA and so forth. One of the things we do here in Vegas is, if you're a first-time offender, so many criminals are not alphas, they're betas. They went along with their idiot friends, committed a crime, and then they end up in jail, and then they can't get back into society, and then we've just like manufactured a criminal. And what they're doing here in Vegas is, hey, if you look like that on a first offense, we'll just send you straight to Hope for Prisoners. We won't send you to jail. And those kids end up doing very, very well. And so it's a really important to look at this holistically.
Locking people up isn't the answer.
Yeah. No,
for a lot of people, right? It doesn't work,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
So how do you change the mindset? How do you, break that cycle, and give them something impactful, right? To look forward to.
Well, and if your listeners and viewers here have never had the misfortune of having a person that they love become an addict or be impacted by mental health, they should count themselves lucky, because that's not the story for the vast majority of us. And when you have somebody addicted in your family, or you have somebody with mental health in your family, that is a tremendous challenge to get them right. The system is just not set up for it. And sometimes, no matter how much you love on them, those addictions are powerful. That mental health is powerful. And we've got to continue to give hope to people. Yeah.
And then this is what's so important. We talked about investment early, and, people are like, well, Ben, like, why can't just, the voters decide what the police department gets, and why are you giving them money, and this and that and the other? And this was one of the things that came out of TechCrunch. Why aren't they going through the normal process? Why are you intervening? And it's like, well, look, these investments, if we can't contain crime, we're never getting to, recidivism. We're never getting to mental health. We're never getting to addiction. We're never getting to any of these other problems. We got to, get ahead of the curve on the most urgent thing, which is, people are getting robbed and murdered and, beaten up, and domestic abuse and all these things. We get a handle on that, then we can really, really move forward and help people. And it's so critical that people understand that, because somebody's got to step up. On behalf of Marc and myself, we just want to thank you for your service, for keeping the community safe, for building, what I think is maybe the greatest police department in the whole country. And thank you to all of your officers for doing the same. It's just been amazing.
No, Kevin and I, on behalf of all of our cops and really the community, thank you for what you guys have done for us. It's remarkable, and it's, going to evolve and really change policing as a whole. So really, you guys are unbelievable. So thank you.
Yeah, just add, listen, thanks isn't enough to the two of you, but it's what I have. Kind of like the budget process. But, there's always that story about the man in the ring, right? And the reality is that you are putting money behind this opportunity. And I want you both to know that what you are doing is saving lives. And while we're going to always have critics about things that it is that we do, we try to do them responsibly. But at the end of the day, I know for a fact it's saving lives. And for me, that's exactly why I'm in this business. So thank you for allowing us to do that.
No, amazing. And to Margot at TechCrunch, you can write what you want about me. You can say what you will about us, but we're not going to stop. So sorry. And with that, we thank you for joining the Marc and Ben Show, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you.